Chapter 41. Causing Gossip. The princess raised her hand and a large steam carriage, marked with the royal family's crest, trundled over to them. "Your Highness, and her esteemed guest. Please allow me to assist you," the driver announced as he hopped down from his seat and swung out a set of steps before opening the door. Then Dominic helped the princess into the carriage, while the noble ladies waiting around for glimpses of the freshly washed guard officers swooned. The sight of them getting all worked up because a guard was a bit kind to someone was an entertaining contrast to the brutality of his day so far. But when the princess closed the door behind Dominic, she was all business. "What did you need me to know?" "I'm sure it's more important than getting to dinner in a hurry," she asked. "We found a goblin lord 2 days ago, leading a large team to ambush Eramo's village, and then just today, after the farms were attacked by hobgoblins, we traced the attackers back into the forest and found another group being led by an ogre," he explained. "Damn it. Where is the ogre now?" Princess Alexis asked, pulling a topographical map from her pocket. "It's dead. We managed to trip it and hack it apart. The guardsmen got off lucky. There were a lot of injured, but nobody died on that patrol. I can't be sure that is true for the other patrols in the region, though. There were countless goblins coming from that direction when I arrived here with the riders. The message that the riders were ordered to pass on was that the goblin hordes were mostly bypassing the town and headed straight for the city. That might not be news anymore, since there are so many of them here, but with the timing, I doubt that wave will be the last of them," he explained. Princess Alexis nodded and held out the map. "Where did you finish off the ogre? And which farms were attacked?" she asked. "We finished the ogre about here? I'm not great with topographical maps. But the hobgoblins attacked a farm on this side of town, and we went straight into the woods, then turned toward the road at the first battle site. The team will have a full report for the guard with more details. My team showed up late." "And where is your team now?" Axel asked. "Back at the village. They grew up on the farms there, so they're staying to protect their homes. Not many of the locals can fight, and they've both got good magic weapons." Dominic shrugged. Alexis nodded. "That makes sense. Nobody wants to fight with the next town over when their own farm is exposed. It's not official, and I will deny if asked, but that's most of the reason that the gates were locked. If they let everyone head home, half the reserves and a good chunk of the guard would be gone, and who knows how many of them would be lost to goblin attacks along the roads to the nearby towns." The carriage made its way through the streets, and Dominic noticed that they weren't headed for anywhere that he was familiar with. It was an upscale area, but it seemed that they were taking an alternate route into the noble district to get to wherever the princess planned to eat. Then the carriage just kept going as the princess made notes on her map and Dominic rested against the wall, exhausted from the day's battle. He really needed to work on his stamina because combat was proving to be even more strenuous than the forge. The change of sounds from the bustle of the city to a suspicious silence brought him out of his reverie, and Dominic's eyes shot open to see Princess Alexis staring at him with a smirk on her face. "I was wondering how long it would take for you to notice. Welcome to the palace, Mr. Dominic. Don't worry about heading home for work in the morning. Pops is already here at the forges, and I will have rooms arranged for you after dinner." "Seriously? Is he chained to the forge or something?" "I can't see Pops willingly leaving his shop at the staging area on a day like this." Dominic joked. "It didn't quite come to that. I will admit that it might have come close to having to use force, but eventually a royal decree summoning him here to make gear for the palace guard was enough to get him to move. At least temporarily." Dominic frowned as he took in the princess features. Still stunningly beautiful with those sharp, almost elfin features and a hint of a bruise along the jawline, but there was not a hint of mockery or deceit in her expression. They really had gone all the way to issuing a royal decree to bring Pops to the palace. "Do I have to ask him how things got to that point, or can you tell me?" he asked. Princess Alexis just shrugged. "All I know is that the royal armorer suddenly quit and left the city in the middle of the night the day before yesterday, along with a number of other wealthy crafters. The timing seems incredibly suspicious, but I prefer not to pass speculation when it might have been another kingdom poaching them away. That happens more often than you might think when it comes to top craftsmen." The carriage came to a stop, and Dominic adjusted his hood before stepping out. It was a good thing that he did, as there were hundreds of upper nobility members standing around in the garden nearby, having some sort of party. "Why do you have your hood up?" Alexis whispered. "Have you forgotten that I have horns?" Dominic replied, then smirked as she froze in realization. "Maybe. Let's go inside a moment, and I will get you a more appropriate hat." Even playing the mysterious sorcerer doesn't get you a pass to wear a hood inside the palace during an event. They stepped through the door, and Dominic was grabbed by a pair of strong but slender arms. "Princess Eleanor, it's good to see you again," he greeted the energetic young paladin. "I knew it was you. The whole palace is abuzz with the news that my sister brought back a date in what sounded suspiciously like Academy mage robes. And they say it was someone who she kills goblins with." Princess Eleanor giggled, then pulled Dominic's hood down. "Here, I have a hat. I thought that this might happen, and everything else you were wearing is likely filthy right now. Stay in those robes, though. Even though they're still a bit wet. We want to remind the nobles that you can kill them if they annoy the princess." Alexis thumped her sister on the head. "We are not encouraging them to think that Dominic will kill them on my behalf, no matter how annoying their sons are. They'll find out in the next day or two that he's the newly drafted royal smith's apprentice anyhow. You have a point. I need to get him more outfits if he's going to be around the palace all the time. If you haven't guessed yet, my father and elder brothers have assigned guards to keep me from sneaking out to fight." The last part was directed at Dominic, who was trying to fix the wide-brimmed hat over his head. Unlike the robes, it wasn't enchanted to automatically fit, and it wasn't designed to go over his horns, which kept making it slide up at the front. "That's no good. Here, let me adjust that." Alexis laughed, then slid the hat in place and fixed it with hairpins. "Perfect. It's not going anywhere, and after you wear it for an hour it will form to your head. New hats are like that. Now let's rejoin the party," Eleanor explained. Chapter 42. Welcome Party. The two of them led Dominic back out into the party, where nobles were sipping wine and snacking on appetizers being passed around by the staff. Dominic was the center of everyone's curiosity, walking between Princess Alexis, who he had arrived with, and Princess Eleanor, who was known among the nobles to be a bit eccentric in her choice of friends. If both of them liked this strange man, then it didn't bode well for their son's chances to land a princess as a wife. Everyone knew that the line of succession was already secured, so the few remaining bachelors and bachelorettes could afford to be picky with their choices. But asking the nobles' eligible sons to be polite to some random sorcerer whose lineage they didn't even know, just to get close to the princess, was a big request. And the princesses knew it. Is the boy a commoner or a lower noble? Does anyone know where he comes from? I heard that he's a sorcerer, but that can't be right. We would know if there was an elder sorcerer in town with a son his age. The guests were whispering to each other as the trio entered the garden. An older woman came up with a very young boy to introduce to the princess, and Eleanor pulled Dominic back a step, forcing Alexis to let go of his arm and leaving her to face the noble alone. Dominic didn't miss the look that Princess Alexis shot her sister as her human shield was removed, but she greeted the woman with grace. "Duchess, how pleasant to see you again today. Might his be your eldest daughter, Molly?" Alexis asked, not so subtly insulting the masculinity of the boy brought before her. The woman giggled and covered her mouth. "Such a sweet talker you are. This is my youngest, Maserati. He desperately wanted to meet you today, and thank you for your valor on the battlefield." The effeminately dressed little boy couldn't have been more than about 8 years old, and looked completely star-struck at his chance to speak with the princess. He gave an elegant bow and smiled up at Alexis. "Thank you for saving our city again, Your Highness. Mother let me watch your heroics from the inner wall with her monocular, and it was so exhilarating." The boy gushed. The princess smirked at Dominic, then patted the boy on the head. "Our entire guard has been working very hard today to keep the city safe, but I appreciate your consideration. Tell me, what was your favorite part?" That seemed like a strange thing to ask a child about combat, but if he was watching it from kilometers away, atop a hill using a telescope, then it was more like watching a movie, and he wouldn't see the blood and gore in the same way. "Oh, that is easy. When that returning scout group charged the back of the goblin lines, and they had the lances, and boom, just ran right through the goblins. I don't know what happened after that. I looked away just in case, but the horses were all right, so I think they won. The boy replied. The princess nodded, not knowing the incident that he was referring to, but it sounded a lot like when Dominic and his group had arrived. There weren't many other times when someone attacked the back of the goblin lines today, as the invaders were all around the city. The Duchess led her young son away before he got too excited and annoyed the princess, but he was immediately replaced by more well-wishers who knew that the princess had been in combat today. Is this the sorcerer that you returned to the city with? He's exquisite, isn't he? I heard that he doesn't even go to combat with the clinic witch's potions on him. One of the young noblemen commented. There are plenty of clerics around during the battle, but he was returning from Eramo's village today after a long journey. Might I introduce you to young Master Dominic, the apprentice to our new royal weaponsmith, and a leading candidate for this year's apprentice intake? Princess Alexis replied. The noble laughed, then paused and looked at the princess. Oh, that wasn't a joke? I just can't picture him inside a forge. What are the commoners thinking, sending such a beauty to the forge instead of to a noble's bed to elevate their status? Surely, it wouldn't be an issue to have gotten him an engagement. Dominic wasn't sure if he should be offended or impressed by this man's boldness. Clearly, he had a very distorted idea of the common people's view of the nobles, but he said it with such confidence that Dominic actually felt that the noble believed he was paying Dominic a compliment. Plus, who would want to marry a noble just for a bit of status? People in the big cities smelled funny, and the forge was warm even without anyone in your bed. Don't let the small arms fool you. Magic users have their own ways of working the forge. Just look at the weapon on his hip. Princess Alexis suggested. Dominic reluctantly unclipped the sheathed dagger from his belt and held it flat on his hands for the curious noble to inspect. An uncommon magical dagger. Now where is the maker's mark? Ah, here. Dominic wavemates. My word, perhaps he does belong in the forge. The noble gasped, then moved back from his close inspection of the workmanship. To think that an apprentice has skills and craftsmanship like that. No wonder your master was tagged for the position of royal weaponsmith. The young noble was pulled away by another conversation, and Dominic gave the princess a harsh look for exposing his skills before the trials. It wasn't unheard of for outsiders to simply go missing in the days before the selection. Don't worry about it. You are under the palace's protection as an intake candidate and Pop's apprentice now, so nobody will try to steal you away. Even an apprentice royal tradesman demands a level of respect from the children of the noble houses. It will most likely be you and Pops making their next set of equipment after all. The princess chuckled. The greatest of leverage, the ability to control who gets properly armored. Dominic joked, causing Alexis to nearly choke on her drink. It's best not to joke about sabotage. She whispered. Who would do such a thing? I'm just saying that schedules are limited, and certain projects are given priority. Dominic shrugged. Alexis laughed. That's the same thing that your master threatened the first time that we tried to call him up from the forge at the staging area. What can I say? I learned from the best. Princess Alexis smiled back at him. It's a good thing that with the emergency, they have moved up the intake trials for the craftsmen. We can't have the two top weaponsmiths finding ways to sneak out of the palace to work at a private toolmaker's forge again. Dominic shrugged. I make no guarantees for Pops. He's quite fond of his regular customers after all. Chapter 43. Royal Palace Dinner. A bell was rung, and the party slowly moved inside to a large dining room. Dominic was seated toward the end of the table, across from a man in green robes with feathers on them, and a witch that smelled like medicine and strong liquor. The seat next to his was empty when he arrived, as was the seat at the foot of the table, which presumably was reserved for whichever noble was unlucky enough to end up at the tradespeople's end of the table. Dominic had no idea how such functions worked, but when Pops was escorted to the seat next to him, leaving only the foot of the table open, he began to relax. It's good to see you again. I would have ended up at the forge if the princess hadn't found me on the way into town. The neighbors have instructions to send you here if they see you. I'll let them know tomorrow that you made it home safe. How was your first trip as a smith? He asked, smiling beneath his thick beard. Other than being attacked by goblins constantly, even when having breakfast at the local crusader's family farm. Not bad. I learned a few useful things about the steam carriages that I didn't know before. Dominic replied with a smile. The witch nodded in agreement, while the man with the feathers only looked concerned. Attacks, you say? The animals spoke of unrest. Perhaps it will reach here soon, he commented. Dominic nodded noncommittally. If he didn't already know the city was under attack, there was no point in telling him now. The old witch gave him a motherly smile. I remember my first trip outside my home coven. We got rained on for 10 straight days, and when we got to the village that was supposed to be buying our medicine, the river had broken its banks, and the whole place was flooded. 10 days. 10 whole days we walked to bring medicine to a town that didn't even exist anymore. But lucky for us, the refugees brought the same sickness to the next town over, and they still needed the potions. The oversized chair at the foot of the table was pulled out, and an aging noble with scars all over his hands and face from a lifetime of combat took his seat. Pops cleared his throat. General Fox, I would like to introduce my apprentice, Dominic Wavemates. The old soldier smiled at Dominic. I know, I have been hearing his name all day. First on the battlefield, then in the common district, where the word is that he has captured as many as 3 young princesses' hearts, and then in the garden, where word of Princess Alexis' new sorcerer that can craft magical weapons is the talk of the nobility. What do you think of the fine rumors that have started around you, young Master Dominic Wavemates? At least 10% of that is true, Lord General Fox. Dominic replied formally. The drunk witch cackled with laughter, tears running down her face, and the feathered man rolled his eyes. He might be a good match for that oddball of a princess. He is a Wavemates. The man snorted with derision, subtly mocking Dominic's presumed connection to the fallen royal family of Wavemates. Come now, Oracle. She's not such an odd one for not wanting to get married early. How old were you when you first got married? The general asked, and the man pointedly ignored his question. Dominic took that as him being a lifelong bachelor, so he kept his opinions to himself and decided to chat with the general instead. General Fox, surely the gossip can't have assumed that a man they saw for the first time was the princess' new consort after they found out that I was the royal smith's apprentice. Dominic asked, You must be new to the boredom and petty intrigue of palace life. I assure you, should the princess not dissuade them of the notion, there will be complaints by the end of the month that she has not set the date for an engagement party. If you were from a known noble family, they would have assumed that the engagement was already formalized by the time that you stepped out of her carriage in the courtyard. Pops patted Dominic on the shoulder. Welcome to palace life. It only gets more chaotic after this. The meal was served, or at least the first course was served. Dominic looked at it in concern for a moment, as it seemed to be nothing but a small cube of steak with a leaf on top, but the others chatted happily as they slowly ate, and then the plate was taken away and more food replaced it. That process repeated 6 times, until finally a dessert came out, and the mood in the room changed. Dominic took that to mean that the meal was nearly over, as the guests seemed to be getting ready to go home. So, is it time to head to the forge and see the rooms I've been assigned for the intake trials? Dominic asked Pops after the 2 across the table from them had left. The forge? Oh, are you in for a shock? The royal forges are used by all of our smiths and metalworkers. Nobody lives in them. Your room is somewhat closer than that. The general laughed. Pops got to his feet and pulled back Dominic's chair for him, while the general straightened his coat. I will escort you, as the princess seems a bit preoccupied. He teased. I suspect that having the princess in my personal rooms might be a bit more scandal than the royal family is ready to deal with today. Dominic laughed. Pops snorted in amusement and shook his head. There is much worse going around the scandal mill every day, most of it untrue. Just the other day, there was a rumor that one of the Arcane Academy precepts had been buying his grades from the headmaster. If it were true, both of them would have been ejected from the academy and banned from the city. A princess dating a sorcerer is a small thing in comparison. In fact, it's not even unlawful. The walk down the halls was a short one, and then the general indicated a room to their right. These are the rooms for the royal weaponsmith. I will accompany you in if you don't mind. I am looking forward to your expression. Pops opened the door, and a luxurious sitting room, complete with a small library and a drafting table, appeared in front of Dominic's eyes. It was incredible, a single room with more knowledge than he had ever hoped to see at once. The dining room is to the right. The master smith's rooms are to the left, 4 rooms in total, each with their own in-suite facilities, in case he has a large family. Then, if we head through the hallway, straight ahead is the servants' corridor to the kitchens, and here is the cleaning supplies closet, and finally, the apprentice quarters. Fully soundproofed, for the days that your tasks take you late into the night to complete. The general explained the layout as he led the way down the narrow corridor, carved from well-polished stone, but completely bare of ornamentation, unlike the opulent main room. The room was 4 meters by 6, simple, with a bed along one wall. His inventory cube had been set on top of the blanket, and a simple chest sat at the foot for personal belongings. The rest of the room consisted of a small magical forge, a workbench with a collection of dusty tools, and a small door that seemed to lead to a water closet and shower. Not bad at all. It's got its own forge and shower. Plus, my room is nearly as large as the front store at the old forge. We're moving up in the world, Pops. Dominic laughed. The general smiled at his excited expression. Now that's what I was hoping for. Not jaded by the world. Just wait until he finds out that the royal smiths, even the apprentices, have access to uncommon magical weapon recipes. If you're lucky, you might even score an armor recipe from the new armorer's apprentice. They usually like to trade so that they can diversify their skills. You're still a probationary apprentice until you can pass the intake, but as the royal weaponsmith's existing apprentice, you get all the privileges of a royal apprentice in advance. Maybe living in a palace isn't all that bad. There are all sorts of chances to learn, and it even smells better here than it does in most of the city. Dominic agreed. There are no coal-fired vehicles allowed within the palace confines, and that helps a lot. But the smithy will still have plenty, since the soot is needed. Or so I'm told. The general explained. That's fine. The smithy always smells better than the outside world. Pops shook the general's hand, and the older man turned to leave. You've got an interesting one there, Pops. Take good care of him. Chapter 44, Inspired. Dominic was too excited to sleep for long, and it was still hours until dawn when he woke up, fully intending to go check out the library in the front room. Then, he realized that he had totally forgotten to clean his actual clothes after arriving in the palace yesterday, and the only thing he had to wear that didn't need to have more goblin filth scrubbed from it was the mage robe he was wearing to dinner, which was completely unsuitable for work. There might still be some clothing from the last few hours' worth of drops, though. At least he hoped there was. He hadn't actually been paying much attention, just stuffing every magic item he could get his hands on into the cube. Even if it was a poor quality magic shirt and pants, he could wear them until he had time to scrub his usual outfit. But when he opened the inventory cube, Dominic got a real surprise. There was a large box in his inventory that definitely hadn't been there before, marked with the royal family's crest. Carefully, he took it out, in case it was too heavy to hold, and set it on the floor. Inside, the box was filled with leather and cloth. 2 new sets of casual clothes suitable for the forge, emblazoned with the royal crest, marking him as an apprentice under their employment, plus a long leather coat for working around hot metal, and 3 elegant mage robes plus a cloak with no hood that would be suitable for dinners and other occasions around the palace. Why they didn't think that he should be dressed in a suit was a mystery to Dominic, but he really didn't know enough about royal etiquette to know if being a sorcerer meant that he should be wearing robes as formal wear. It's not like being part dragon was a profession. Or if it was, Dominic had never figured out how to monetize it. Every item had the same crest on it, so they must have been a formal uniform of sorts for the staff, but they were all beautifully made by the royal staff tailors. The rest of his clothes had been meticulously scrubbed clean and folded in a simple bag. Even the drop items from the goblins, which were always filthy when you got them, had been laundered. Dominic was briefly outraged that someone had gone through his belongings. They didn't appear to have taken any of his scrap parts or mana cores, though. So, Dominic made a mental note to apologize to whoever had to clean the rags that the goblins dropped. At the very least, he did have clothes to wear to work today. Once he was showered and changed into his new uniform of black pants and a button shirt that was definitely going to be annoying under his apron, Dominic headed for the library to see what he could find before Pops woke up and told him where to find food. The library shelves were carefully organized by weapon types, with the scrolls sorted by item rarity within the shelf. The common items began around waist height to just over Dominic's head, and then the uncommon ones were at the very top of the shelves. They should have a rare item scroll or two here somewhere, he was certain, but they were likely locked away in the master's room and inaccessible to anyone who might happen to make it into the main area. But the uncommon magical item plans were still plenty for Dominic. He had a total of 3 blueprints in his inventory at the moment, and only 2 of them were weapons. Plus, it was a revolver and a gun's word, both of which were specialized weapons that most of the guardsmen didn't use much. If he was going to impress whoever was doing the intake, he needed something more practical. So he started with the most obvious. The uncommon quality broadsword. That should be the mainstay of the Royal Guard, he assumed. Most of the guards used a broadsword and a spear as their primary weapons during the battle against the goblins, so those would be his priorities today. The details for making an uncommon grade blade were surprisingly easy. The blade itself was essentially the same as Pops had taught him to make any other blade, and then there was a single circuit that should be etched into the blade to draw mana to it and charge the magical crystal in the hilt. That was it. Just a simple Magitech circuit with a few branches to keep the edge strong and sharp, as well as integrating the socketed enhancement gem in the hilt. The more he looked at it, the better he understood the circuit, and the more clearly Dominic understood that it was no different from making a light turn on from a battery, except that the battery in this case was wireless and magical. He had learned that as a child, and with years of repairing other people's junk for spending cash, he understood far more than most about how the circuits needed to line up in order to function, and what some of the most obvious ones did. Daydreaming about new magical weapons and a glorious life recognized as a great arcane engineer, he began to draw out plans for new weapon designs in the notepad as his mind focused on understanding the magical pathways that made a Magitech weapon function. Dominic didn't realize that he had gotten lost in his doodling, drawing in one of the fresh notebooks, trying to improve the design of the broadsword plan that he had found, until Pops woke up and greeted him. "It looks like you've gotten ahead on your coursework already. What makes you think that will be a functional weapon?" he asked, indicating his drawing. "Well, it's the simple circuit from the uncommon Magitech sword here. That's nearly impossible to mess up. But that seemed a bit boring, so I added a layer of energy shielding, the same sort of solid energy barrier that is used for security doors. In theory, it will extend from a short sword to a broadsword with a bit of mana. The inscriptions are still in place, and it's a simple bit of magical circuitry, so I think it should still create an uncommon blade," Dominic explained, hoping that his idle ideas wouldn't get him in trouble first thing in the morning. "And how are you going to keep the energy field from breaking the first time it hits something?" he asked. "Still working on that part. I know an armor recipe, and it's got a magical rune and circuit in it to enhance durability. If I add that here and here on each section, it should activate with the blade extension and make it durable enough for actual use," he suggested, hopefully. "All right, after breakfast, we will go to the forge and you'll try out your plan so you can see whether you are right or not." Pops agreed. "Or you could tell me now, and I could fix it before I get to the forge and make a fool of myself." Pops laughed and shook his head. "No, you need to actually make your plans, or you won't truly understand the practical matters of making a complex Magitech weapon. It's all part of the learning process, Apprentice Dominic." Chapter 45, Growth Rate. Breakfast was brought to them by ringing a bell-marked kitchen. Pops pulled the string, and a few minutes later a preteen girl in a maid outfit rushed in pushing a cart with 2 trays on it. "Good morning, Master Smith and Apprentice Dominic. Your meal is served." "Oat porridge and toast with dried fruits," she offered, then set the plates on the table and rushed away. "There's water and tea in the kitchen there. Brew us a pot, would you? It's an apprentice's job to have the tea ready in the morning," Pops informed him with a serious look. "Got it. No more ale for breakfast. I'll have the tea ready every morning," Dominic agreed. Pops laughed and poured himself a pint of ale from a keg in his storage item, then sat down at the table and uncovered his plate. "No more breakfast ale. For you. And only one for me because the tradesmen here are sticklers for the rules, and it wouldn't do to show up to work smelling of drink," he joked. He was also dressed in a uniform outfit, but much fancier than Dominic's, with actual gold thread and bronze ornaments attached to it, compared to his completely plain outfit. First things first, though. You need to wear your trade skill core in the open while you are in the forge. The heat won't hurt it, and the rules demand that everyone proves their skill on demand. Where do you have it now? Pops asked. In the pocket of my apron. Dominic shrugged. Nothing he wore while working had sockets. It was all disposable other than the apron, which didn't have any adornment. I thought it might be something like that. Here, I bought you a tradesman's bracer set. Put the blacksmithing core in one, and if you've got another gem attuned, stick it in the other. He instructed. Dominic took out his blacksmithing core and the Magitech orb of minor skill gain rate increase that he had gotten from Bella as part of the price for the mana revolver. I should likely level these up a little bit. I've got plenty of goblin cores, but I was saving them in case I needed them to craft stuff. I could likely use half of them to get some levels on the gems. Dominic suggested. What sort of trip did you have that the blacksmith ended up killing goblins? I swear that we went over this. Pops asked. It was chaos. Everywhere we went, there were more of them. But I also went out hunting once with the guards and some friends I met in Eremos village, and then there was the defense of the farms when the hobgoblins led an attack. So in all, I've got like 40 cores. Dominic shrugged. Pops laughed and patted him on the head, squashing his hair flat. That's more than enough to get you some respect for your skills. It looks like your trade skill core is already up to Apprentice 3 and growing well, but a bit of a bump to Apprentice 5 would put you in the ranks of senior apprentices and halfway to being able to challenge the advancement to journeyman. I'll let you keep your secret on how you managed to get the core to level up twice in the same week when you didn't know any recipes at all, and only one forge rune, but you should put at least one level into that trade skill core. Alright, let's see how it goes. Dominic agreed. This would be the first time that he had ever performed the process of transferring the magic from one core to another or to a Magitech item, but in theory, it was simple enough. Hold it in your hand and focus the energy on the destination. Dominic focused on the first of the goblin's mana cores and pushed the magic out of it into the trade skill core. A hint of magic flowed through him from the enchanted gem, giving his mind a hint of the knowledge that Pops had embedded inside. That was what he was after, so he continued the process, going through 3 of the cores before he managed to get it to level up, and then another 12 to get it to level 5. That solidified a bit more of the crafting knowledge from the trade skill core in his mind, and left the trade skill gem just a bit brighter and a bit lighter yellow than it had been. As Dominic's skill as a blacksmith advanced, the color would slowly go from a flickering yellow to a solid and bright yellow, then gain flickers of blue as he advanced through the journeyman ranks. When he reached the entry to Master Smith, it would have advanced as far as it could, and from there on it was up to him to craft a masterpiece item suited to his trade skill to accept the knowledge of a master artisan. Pops had hidden his masterpiece for years, pretending to still be a journeyman, but in the end, nobody had believed that he hadn't advanced, and now he had been recognized as the Royal Master Weaponsmith. At Apprentice 5, Dominic was halfway through the apprentice rank advancement, which got exponentially harder with every step. Good training could get you through the early stages with relative ease, and Dominic's luck at getting a rare blueprint had made that process incredibly quick, but there wasn't much now that would accelerate the process like that again. Another rare recipe would help, but not as much as the first. Going from rank 2 to 3, as he had when he got the mana revolver recipe, was dozens of times easier than going from Apprentice 5 to 6. That was where the minor skill gain rate Magitech orb came into play. Advancing it would help us bring other skills up more quickly, and although it was the lowest grade of Magitech orb, it was by far the most valuable item that Bella had traded him for the revolver. As he held it in his hand and felt the attunement finalize, Dominic prepared to transfer the majority of his cores to the device, hoping to get it to rank 3. Advancing Magitech items was more tricky than a trade skill core. The trade skill would progress in a linear fashion, absorbing magic to fully attune to the user and unlock all the knowledge contained inside. But for other enhancement gems, and especially Magitech items, how will they attune to you made a significant difference in how much effort it took to make them advance. Not just everyone was well suited to every enhancement after all. Every person's body and mind were different. The first goblin core settled into the Magitech orb, and it seemed to come to life, awakening from its dormant state to welcome him. The device buzzed in his hand as the magic was integrated, and Dominic continued to add cores to the growing sense of attunement that it was generating. After 25 cores, Pops called a halt to his efforts. "That is enough for today. You'll run right out of them if you don't stop now, and it's not going to reach another level before you do," he warned. Dominic paused his fueling to look at the orb. It had just broken through to rank 3, glowing with a dim but steady golden light between the delicate gears inside its protective cage. It was a beautiful sight, and it would be a shame not to wear this one all day. "Put them both in the bracer, and let's get to the forge. You've got a design to test." Chapter 46, Royal Smithy Wagers. Dominic tidied up the blueprints he had been studying and tucked the notebook that he had been working from under his arm. This was going to be a trial by fire, somewhat literally, to see if his ideas about how he would design something versus how to repair it back to the original spec were actually functional. Along the way, they met up with a pair of farrier's apprentices, the ones who made almost all the horseshoes and other equine equipment that the royal family needed, including the tack for the mechanical horses, as they wore through them just as quickly as any other horse. "So, how does it feel to be the master weaponsmith, old man? I hope you brought something impressive for that journeyman armorer. He was pushing hard to be chosen for the spot, and I hear he's pretty bitter." The farrier greeted Pops as they walked. "I'm not showing him shit. If he wants to impress someone, he needs to at least get on my level. Hell, he's barely on par with my apprentice, and I don't care what his trade core says." Pops snorted in derision. The farrier laughed and gestured with his chin toward the forges. "Look at that. He's even come early to wait for you. Don't mind us if we stay for the show." The portly man standing by the door sneered as he greeted them. "Well, look what the gutters coughed up. Finished slumming it with the gate trash?" The man asked. If his apprentice is this disrespectful, I can only imagine what the guy who wanted to be granted the rank of Royal Mastersmith is like. Dominic mock whispered to Pops, deliberately loud enough to be heard, and pointedly ignoring the bright blue trade skill gem on the man's necklace. If he wasn't already technically a master, he was very close to it. "Why, you little are those horns? Did you pick a sorcerer as an apprentice? Just when I thought that you couldn't get any lower, you managed to surprise me again." The man snarled, addressing Pops. "Aye, they're horns. We were so short on decent smiths in town that I took in the first waif that came to my door looking for work. Good thing, too. He turned out so much better than the last noble who wanted to be my apprentice. He's got actual skills." Pops replied. The man's jaw ticked, and a vein in his head looked like it was going to burst, but Pops guided Dominic right past the enraged smith and over to the forges. "Everyone, listen up. It's my apprentice's first attempt to craft a magic item that he designed himself. It's an ambitious one, but as usual, and in my role as his master, I will be hosting the betting," Pops announced. The forge filled with cheers and shouts as Dominic rolled out the blueprint and the other apprentices ran to get his materials. "Don't be expecting this treatment again, but we're wagering on you winning," one of the young men informed him as he placed the required materials on the bench. "Thanks, I just hope I won't let you down. This really is a design that I made and my first time trying," he replied. "Pops wouldn't lie to us. We knew it would be true. Just keep focusing and you'll get it. That plan looks solid, so even if part of it doesn't work, you should still get a common grade out of it, and that's not a complete fail on the bet." Even if Dominic turned out a mediocre creation or a partial success, everyone would get their money back from Pops. The only one who would lose out was Dominic, as it was his reputation as an apprentice weaponsmith at stake. A weaponsmith about to be judged by his journeyman peers during the official apprentice selection, which was clearly riding on his ability to succeed with an unknown blueprint of questionable quality. The materials that they had found for him were all top quality, already refined up to weapons grade standards by the forge helpers, the junior workers who were hoping to get taken in as someone's official apprentice while they did the drudge work. Without a chance to do real blacksmith work, they rarely got any skill gains, so they were stuck at level 1 if they even had a trade skill core, but they were young, and most of them were working on building up their bodies to the stamina and strength levels that the journeyman demanded. The other workers all looked over the plans that Dominic had laid out before they placed their bets, and he could tell that the majority of them were tending toward him failing. The project was considered too ambitious for an apprentice to take on, especially with the magical barrier that was created solely by the Magitech circuitry. Normally, the life of a smith was very direct. They were born from a family of smithy workers, they got a job with the smithy, they got an apprenticeship in the smithy, and that was that. Most of them were barely educated enough to read the blueprints, and the number of them who were familiar with Magitech device design and repair without going to the artificer's school was close to zero. In a way, that was Dominic's greatest advantage, and today it was the unknown factor that he hoped would sway the betting toward him not owing Pops for a huge gambling loss. With that in mind, Dominic got the metals into the forge to soften while the forge workers operated the bellows. "How about we make a proper bet?" the journeyman armorer suggested to Pops. "Oh, what would you like to wager?" "How about we go for a month's wages? Make it count for something," he offered. Dominic could almost feel Pop's smile as he looked at the antagonistic armorer before agreeing. "You've got yourself a deal." Then Dominic dug out the circuitry shapes in the sandpit by his workstation, where the bronze would be poured to create the rough outline of the magical circuit. That could cool while he worked on the intricate design of the double-edged shortsword blade and the core of the sword on which the Magitech circuitry would be mounted. He whistled happily as he worked, ignoring the crowd that was neglecting their own work to see how he was doing, and began to hammer out the basic components while the brass liquefied. "Well, he at least knows what he's doing with the hammer. I'll be back to check up on him in an hour," the farrier informed Pops, with a friendly pat on the back. That was the signal for most of the others to disperse to their tasks, with only the master armorer remaining behind to keep an eye on Dominic's progress. Dominic got the feeling it was so that Pops couldn't cheat and help him out or replace his design with one of Pop's own. But Pops wouldn't make life that easy on him. He wanted his apprentice to learn where he had messed up on the blueprints, and to see if he would catch it on his own, or if he would have to try again. The blade would be created with a notch in the middle, and then an outer plate on one side of the fuller would be pinned and pressed to hold in the core so that the delicate circuitry would not be damaged when the weapon took a hit. That added a lot more difficulty to this than just creating a standard blade. Fortunately, the Royal Forges already had a tool to shape the blade around, and he wouldn't have to mock one up. The core, which included the majority of the structure of the hilt, bent into shape rather smoothly, and Dominic was reaming out the peg holes for the grip so they were perfectly round when the brass was finally ready to pour into the circuit paths, once he had carved them out of wax and surrounded that with sand to keep it from running. But when he looked over to the sand table, someone had put a hand on his patterns, messing up 3/4 of the designs that he had sketched out. While that was annoying, it wasn't the end of the world. A quick swipe with the leveling board, and he sketched out another set of designs from the blueprints, while the bronze lingered in the forge. Then he poured the bronze and let it set up as he worked on the outer shell of the blade. The hard part would be getting the moving portions of the circuit's actuation relays to perfectly align without having pre-made mold stamps. Artificers would, and anyone who regularly made gears and Magitech circuits, like the repairmen, but this was a royal military working forge for standard-issue weapons, armor, and horse supplies. They weren't the ones that you went to for that sort of fancy thing. But Dominic knew a simple trick to making the layers of circuit work together. He just had to make them all identical, and then space out the mounting points until they met properly. And that was what he did. He lined up all the layers of thin brass so that they met perfectly, then center-punched the marks for the holes in the frame that would slide into the center of the blade to mount the pins. Drilling hot metal wasn't all that hard, and the forge here had outstanding tools, which had Dominic looking over his assembled weapon by lunch. He had made one minor mistake as he created the circuit. The original design would have only enhanced the durability of the outer shell, not the interior magical workings. If the blade was used, the thin brass would warp the first time someone blocked it, or the blade hit a solid object. Something like ogre armor. Fortunately, he had noticed in time to make the corrections, so he could pretend like he hadn't come within minutes of creating absolutely useless decorative trash. All that was left was to inscribe the final magical pathways into the circuits, then attach a gem of some sort to either give it an enhancement or hold the potential for a spell to activate with his own mana. He had designed the hilt to hold a spell gem, but he didn't have any unaligned gems of his own. A minor oversight on his part. So, The gem was the only thing that he didn't have available. There wasn't one in the pile of stuff that the other apprentices had assembled, and he didn't see any of them around in the supply room. In fact, there likely weren't any, as they were a precious resource for everyone, and only the Magitech orbs could be created. All forms of gems had to be obtained from the monsters or mined, cut, and polished. He would have to figure that out later. And for now, Dominic would just crush a monster core over it, the way that they had done for the first weapons creation lesson at Pop's Forge, and hope that it turned out for the best. That was the best plan that he could come up with. Adding a crushed goblin core and a load of mana, with the durability and energy barrier Magitech circuit, should be enough to make this blade an uncommon magic blade, even without a gem attached. A few final touches to the Magitech circuitry engraved between the blade and the gem mount, and it was time for the moment of truth. The armorer whistled loudly as he was finishing the carving, nearly making Dominic scratch the last line improperly, and everyone gathered around him. Dominic carefully ground a core from one of the hobgoblins into dust while the blade heated, and then hesitated. Everyone knew he was a sorcerer, so maybe he could use the dragonfire to make a better demonstration piece? It would definitely win the bet. But he really didn't want to show off that particular ability in public. Wiz's family seemed reliable, and he trusted them, or at least their rural location, to keep the important parts to themselves. But he didn't know anyone here but Pops, and he had only ever heard how treacherous the palace culture was. Perhaps it was better if he didn't show off any unusual skills. The blade was up to temperature to add the core dust, and as Dominic sprinkled the core dust, he added a pulse of magic, which turned the blade shining silver. Dominic focused on sending mana through the circuitry as the blade's creation finished, and the blade lit up with a solid red energy barrier as it flicked from inert to active and back again at his directions. Rare item created. Energy, Sword of Rage. Level 4 enchantment. Grants the user 4% strength while in combat. Added damage and durability. Having the trade skill core on his wrist, where he could see the notifications within the gem, made life so much easier. Chapter 47. George isn't happy. You've got to be kidding me. The apprentice designed and crafted a rare Magitech weapon? Oh, George will be so pissed. Dominic heard someone mutter. George, the journeyman armorer with hopes to be the Royal Forge's new master before Pops was called up, was not impressed at all. There is no way that he made that on his own. I don't know how you did it, but you have cheated. He insisted. A few of the other smiths laughed at him, and an old man with skin nearly as dark as the coal they used to increase the carbon in the steel thumped George on the head. You think they fooled all of us? I've been watching as well, and I saw the boy improvise when he realized he had messed up the plan. Unless they're secretly psychic, you lost fair and square. Now pay the man and take it as a lesson not to be stupid in the future. The master armorer insisted. George reluctantly pulled a bag from his inventory item, a fancy golden rectangle that hung off the side of his belt. So, what do you plan to do with that now that you've made it? Pops asked, while gesturing to Dominic's new sword. Well, it's nice and light, so I had considered stabbing something with it. But maybe I should trade it for good stuff. Dominic shrugged. You would stab someone with a rare sword? One of the apprentices asked in shock. Something for sure. Possibly a goblin. But it's a sword. That's what they're made for. He replied. But you're a blacksmith, not a soldier. The apprentice reminded him. And a sorcerer. So stabbing them is somewhat redundant, as I can cast spells, but it is still rather satisfying, Dominic agreed. Pops laughed and shook his head at the silliness of their argument. Both of you have work to do. But if you don't want to keep that blade, I can have it sold to someone who needs it. Pops suggested. The other apprentices gave Dominic envious glares. Nothing that they made belonged to them. It was all the property of either their master or the Royal Forge. But that didn't hold true for rare magical items. They didn't come about often, so the royals only demanded a cut of the sales price for the ones made in their forge. I have the recipe. I can always make another. However, right now, I need enhancement gems or Magitech orbs to help with my skills and my spells. Dominic explained. Do you think it's so easy to just make a rare magic item? One of the other apprentices asked. The recipe is right there. I don't see what the problem is. Why not ask your master if you can make one as well, if you're hard up for cash? Dominic asked. It was only natural. If you had the skills to make what people needed, you made it, and you traded it for what you needed. However, Dominic was not human, and the way that he imbued the weapon with mana as the mana core dust was absorbed into the blade was not something that your average human could do. Dominic could do it, and Pops could do it, but they were both born with magic. Other than the two of them, there might not be another in the forge who could actually use that technique. In short, no. The apprentice couldn't simply make one for himself, even if he had the plan in front of him. The apprentice laughed ruefully, while a journeyman came over with a set of materials in his hand. That's an excellent idea. All the apprentices will spend the day recreating those blades for sale or distribution. If there is a rare item created, the apprentice will get the full creator's cut of the funds. The journeyman weaponsmith announced. Pops chuckled and placed a crude drawing in front of Dominic. This is what you're doing today. I want 50 enchanted spearheads out of you before you return to your room tonight. Lunch will be served soon, and dinner comes straight to the forge. No need to waste time going anywhere. The smug dwarf informed his apprentice with a demanding look that promised that Dominic was not getting out of his daily quota of work, even if he had won Pops a couple of extra a month's salary. Dominic got the iron for the spearheads, and then realized that he had no idea how he was supposed to enchant them without using up all of his own cores. Hey, are there more mana cores here somewhere for the regular weapons? Pops wants enchanted spearheads, he asked. The apprentice beside him shook his head. The best we've got are the enchanted oils from the alchemists. Dunk the annealed and glowing spearhead to temper it, and it should absorb a bit of mana from the oil. If you've got fresh oil, it's usually about a 50-50 whether it holds a common enchantment. So that was how they were doing it. There was a bucket of quenching oil by his station, but Dominic hadn't had to use it when he was creating the sword with the monster core. But Pops wanted him to hammer out 100 spearheads by the end of the day, just to make 50 enchanted ones? That was plain unreasonable. Well, he could just cast them and then forge an edge, but that was liable to introduce bubbles and make for crappy, brittle metal compared to Pop's usual standard of work. It might be the only way to finish, though. So, he took one of the half-completed spearheads from an unattended station and pressed 10 molds into his sand table, then returned it and got to work. The forge workers had metal already heated for him, sitting in the forge waiting for him to get to it, and Dominic gave them a polite bow. As we said, don't count on it, but you won us a bunch of money today, and we're feeling generous. The boy whispered. Dominic poured the first 10 spearheads and waited while they cooled in the wet sand enough to begin to work with. Then he took a punch to cut notches and hammered the first one into a nice serrated edge that would cause a savage wound both going in and coming out. Then he hammered the leading edges to a wedge shape for the cutting edge. After that, he just had to use the rasp and file the spearhead to a decently sharp surface, and Dominic sighed at the slipshod workmanship. The magical upgrade would have to compensate for the fact it was not pretty. After grabbing a spear handle and hammering the cupped portion of the spearhead into notches cut to hold the head in place, he noticed that much of the hobgoblin core dust he had crushed was still in the crucible. He had some regular goblin core dust as well, which he took from his inventory cube and dumped into the oil to make room for the hobgoblin core dust in its container. Then he infused the oil with a bit more mana, giving it a shimmering glow, before he dunked the spearhead in it. Uncommon weapon created. Brutal spear, his trade skill core flashed. Dominic smirked at the success of his crafting hack and began to hammer another one into shape. It would take hundreds of dunks to wear out that shimmering oil. He just needed to add mana. Maybe being a sorcerer really was suited to the job of a weaponsmith. He used the tongs to pull another one from the sand and pounded it to shape, then repeated the process. Uncommon weapon created. Brutal spear. Finally, someone noticed what he was doing as he was finishing the third one. Journeyman Jones, the new apprentice, is glitched, he shouted. A middle-aged man came over and watched Dominic hammering out a strangely vicious spearhead, then mounting it to the shaft before tempering it in the enchanted oil. Common weapon created. Brutal spear. That time he didn't add more mana to the mixture, but it still turned out a fairly decent result. That seemed to be the great difference between crafted items. He could innately use magic, Pops could use magic, but very few others could without relying on the spell gems or magitech orbs, which did them no good here, unless they had a spell gem designed to add mana to an alchemist's oil-based potion. "Are you in a rush to get something done, Apprentice Dominic?" the journeyman asked. "Pops says he wants 50 of these enchanted before bed. I'm assuming that means just pound them out to a common grade magical item, or better. Or am I supposed to be making them all uncommon? Because that sounds like a real pain," he replied. The journeyman laughed. "Go ahead then. If you think you can get 50 enchanted spears done and still make it to bed tonight, I wish you the best of luck." Chapter 48. Dominic's Spears. When Pops woke up the next morning, the first thing he did was to check the apprentice quarters to see if Dominic had made it to bed, or if he was still working. There was no need to go inside the room. The door wasn't fully closed to soundproof it, and he could hear the boy snoring away and mumbling in his sleep about spearheads from down the hallway. It was a rite of initiation for the new apprentices to work day and night most days until they got their speed up to par, and none of the journeymen actually expected that the apprentices would be able to get the first task that they were assigned done by dawn. Instead, they would pretend to relent in the morning after breakfast and send their apprentices to bed for a few hours, only to drag them out of bed for lunch and put them back to work finishing the previous day's tasks. So, as the new apprentice candidate had made it back before he woke up, Pops went to the forge after breakfast to see how Dominic had done. As he walked, the old dwarf realized this vetting process was all just for show. There were no other weaponsmith apprentices in the forge for the intake exam. There were farriers, one armorer, and a number of other trades, but no other weaponsmiths. How could Dominic lose a contest when there were no other competitors? The palace had tricked them into a guaranteed placement. The royal family knew his personality well enough to know that he wouldn't simply abandon his apprentice once they were already settled in here. Pops strolled into the forge, where he was met with a round of thunderous applause and a line of smithy workers forming a walkway to the workstation where he had left his apprentice working last night. The first thing that he noticed when he arrived was the sand table that had been set up to make spearheads 10 at a time, and the row of forged tools carefully rearranged on the wall in the order that they were needed to craft spears, instead of the standard order that they had been in the day before. Then he saw the bundle. 50 spears, tied together in a bunch, like a sheaf of wheat. "Where are the failures?" Pops asked as he took in the workstation. "There aren't any." He worked until the small hours of the morning, but he didn't fail a single spear. "They are all right there." One of the forge workers informed him. "Were you on night shift?" Pops asked. "I was. But you can ask Journeyman Deckard as well. He was on this side of the forges all night, overseeing the other apprentices who had work to do, and he saw everything." Naturally, most tradesmen would take the word of a journeyman over that of a forge worker, but Pops just nodded. He had somewhat expected this, and the boy's reputation would be ruined if the others found out that he'd lied to the new master weaponsmith. Pops opened the bundle and spread the spears out along the wall. Nice uniformity. A bit of an odd stylistic choice, but they should be combat effective. Perhaps that is part of the secret to his success? 2/3 are uncommon. That's highly unusual for an apprentice. "Where is his oil bucket?" Pops asked. "I believe he took it with him, sir. Something about it being a lucky bucket." The forge worker replied. The other smiths laughed at that. Superstition among craftsmen was pretty common, and he wouldn't be the only one that had a lucky tool that they used all the time. Though, none of them had heard of a lucky oil bucket being blamed for their success. The journeyman who had been on duty for the night shift tilted his head toward the row of spears. "I must say, for a first day at the forge, he certainly made a good impression. Once he attunes more closely with that blacksmithing core, he's going to be a monster. If I didn't know better, I would swear that he was cheating somehow." The forge attendants nodded in agreement, while one old master chuckled quietly to himself in the corner, where he was etching ornate pins striping into a piece of plate mail. "You lot didn't notice at all, did you?" Of course, the sorcerer was cheating. Why would he not cheat? The assignment was to make 50 magical spears, not to make life as difficult as possible for himself. The old man quietly muttered to himself. The armorers near him all turned to catch his words. The old man always had good advice, but he hated people, so he rarely talked to them directly. Armor? What do you mean by cheated? Did he not make the spears himself? One of the other weaponsmiths asked. Of course he made them himself, you half-wit. They've all got his maker's mark on them. But what can a sorcerer do that you can't? He scoffed, gesturing with his hands to emphasize his point. Then his voice dropped back to a more normal volume, and he coughed for half a minute before continuing. He added mana to his oil bucket every time he made a weapon so that they would all turn out magical. How did you watch him all night and not figure that out? Perhaps you spent too much time staring at his horns instead of his hammer? If you weren't so damn stupid, you would have been a journeyman by now. The old man ranted. All right, that's enough. No making the apprentices cry this week, you promised. Journeyman Deckard reminded him. Not my fault if he cries because he can't see what is in front of his face. Deckard gave the old man a glare, and he huffed, then returned to his work, decorating the ornamental armor piece he was working on. Pops bundled the spears back up into a sheath before looking out over the gardens outside the forge. I should probably send my apprentice to take his spears out to the line. They're going to need them soon, and they should know who they come from, since Dominic's maker's mark is a new one to them. He decided. He did get the job done in one night. We might have to update the way that the rest of our apprentices make spears, though. Those look vicious, and they're sure to cause some real damage as you pull them free. Journeyman Deckard noted. Well, he's been asleep for a few hours. I'm sure that he's up for another goblin bloodbath with the princess. One of the farriers joked. Pop sighed and rolled his eyes. He couldn't even refute that. If he sent the boy to the front lines with a bundle of spears, he was definitely coming back covered in goblin blood. He had likely killed more of them than the rest of the apprentices in the forge combined, and he was the only one under journeyman level that was fully familiar with the proper use of core dust. Raising a proper apprentice really was a hassle, but Pops wasn't one to give up halfway. He would just have to push the palace to formalize the intake early and make him a proper apprentice. Chapter 49. Delivery Wagons. Pops supervised the apprentices and journeymen for a few hours, as there were no orders for master-crafted weapons at the moment, and then went to collect lunch for himself and Dominic, who was still mumbling about spears in his sleep. The lucky oil bucket in question was sitting next to the forge in his room, still laden with mana and suspiciously shiny. Pops kneeled next to the bucket for a closer look and realized that he had dumped a bit of core dust into the oil for added effects, and then included some of his own mana to improve the efficiency. It was a devious measure that he wasn't sure even the old armorer had fully appreciated. Dominic, wake up, it's time for work. Pops shouted from right beside his bed. 5 more minutes. I paid for the full night, he mumbled as he snuggled deeper into his pillow. They're going to take your oil bucket if you don't get up. Pops tried. That made him open his eyes a bit, and magic flared at Dominic's fingertips before the bucket seemed to disappear as the stool shifted across the floor, and his eyes closed again. Did you just cast invisibility on the oil bucket? Pops asked. Sleeping. I'm sleeping. Dominic complained as he slowly realized that it was Pops speaking and that he wasn't at a hotel with soft beds. He rolled to an upright position, then stretched his arms over his head and rolled his neck to get the stiffness out. It's not invisibility, it's just a minor illusion. I made it look like the work stool. Serves them right if they sit in the bucket. Dominic grumbled. Then the smell of roasted meat wafted into the room as the staff brought in lunch, and the exhausted dragonkin began to look more awake. Get dressed to go for a walk through the city. There should be a uniform for that. Once you've had lunch, you'll go deliver your spears. Pops informed him with a smile. Oh, yes, spears. How did you like them? It took me nearly all night to finish. Pops patted the short blonde sorcerer on the head. They're excellent. I'm sure the spearmen will love them. That's why you're going to deliver them personally. Now, get some food in you, they will be needing those spears. I heard that they're seeing more large monsters along with the goblins again. Something strange is going on out there, and it looks like it will get worse before it gets better. Dominic thought about the ogres he had seen fighting alongside the goblins. That wasn't normal. The ogres didn't take goblins as slaves or workers, so they shouldn't have much to do with each other. Someone or something else must have been organizing them. They made their way back to the forge after lunch, where they found the whole weaponsmith's area in shambles, with tools scattered all over the floor and the bundle of spears thrown everywhere. The area was suspiciously empty, except for the old armorer working in the corner. "That failed apprentice of yours sure has a temper," the old armorer noted as they walked past him. "What's his problem today? Seems like he wanted to get his money back, so he made a wager with Deckard that your boy wouldn't get done before noon today." The old man replied with a smirk. "Well, as long as he didn't break the weapons, they all need to go out to the front lines right now." Pops sighed. "Nah, he wouldn't go that far. He didn't have the guts to get written up by the Lord General for damaging Royal Guard property, so he just made a mess and stormed off. If you see him, tell him that Deckard is looking for him and wants his money," the old man added. "Will do. Dominic, collect all your spears and get them to the front lines along with any other enchanted weapons that the apprentices turned out last night. The ones from the journeymen will be brought to the guard officers here in the palace." Pops explained. That made sense. The officers got the good stuff, and the rest of the guard got the leftovers. Well, most of the time. There were numerous uncommon grade spears in the batch today, and that didn't seem to be the norm for these weapon deliveries. In fact, out of the entire wagon that they loaded, there were only 2 other uncommon grade magical weapons made by the apprentices. The 2-wheeled cart was pulled by a mechanical donkey and had a spring-mounted seat in the front, like the stereotypical farmers' carts of children's stories. Mostly farmers couldn't afford mechanical donkeys and had larger wagons, but the stereotype continued. "I will see you all soon." Dominic laughed as he vaulted up onto the seat of the wagon. The donkey came to life as he tapped the reins, walking through the palace grounds, while Pops and the old armorer laughed at the excited sorcerer. Dominic bounced along the cobblestone roads with everyone moving out of the way of the palace wagon, knowing that it had the weapons for the guard, who were out fighting right now. The donkey wouldn't go faster than a slow trot, but it was still fast enough on the bouncy seat of the wagon. He left through the noble quarter gate, the closest to the forge, and the moment that he passed the gates, the stench of dead goblins in the sun assaulted his nose, and the sounds of battle doubled in volume. "What are you delivering, apprentice?" A guard sergeant yelled from near the line, struggling to be heard over the din of battle. "Royal weaponsmith apprentice, Dominic, with today's weapons. I've got plenty of uncommon spears and a collection of blades and axes," he yelled back. "I'll take them. The hobgoblins are breaking weapons faster than we can replace them." "How many spears do you have?" he asked at a more normal volume as the wagon covered the 100 meters to the front lines. Dominic fired an arcane blast into a hobgoblin that was gaining an upper hand on a pair of guards and pulled the donkey to a stop. "I've got 50 spears, mostly uncommon," he replied. "Well, ain't that sweet? The journeyman did something nice for the enlisted for a change," he muttered. "Oh, I wouldn't count on that. Their gear goes straight to the officers. I made the spears yesterday. See, they've all got my mark on them," Dominic explained. "Uncommon weapons in bulk from the new apprentice? I must say, we got the best end of the deal when they hired Pops." One of the guards joked as he began to ransack the wagon for a new weapon. He had a broken short sword on his hip, so Dominic found him a replacement, and the guard ran off. "How do we do this? Do I just roll along the line, handing weapons out like candy? Or are you coming with me to get them out the way you like?" Dominic asked. "I will walk beside the cart. Hand me what I ask for, and I will be sure that it gets delivered." The sergeant agreed, then gestured for a runner to come to them. "Boy, give the weapons out as I hand them to you," he instructed the errand boy. Dominic threw out more spells as they talked, picking off the wounded monsters, or the ones that looked like they were getting the advantage. "Do you always cast spells at everything you pass?" The sergeant joked. "Only the ugly things. You have no idea how hard it is not to cast on some of the nobles," Dominic replied with a wink. The man's smile highlighted an old scar that ran the length of his face. Then he whistled and threw a whole handful of spears toward a unit beside them. "Treat for you gents from the new apprentice. Try to take good care of them," he instructed. Chapter 50. Weapon Distribution. They were almost out of weapons to distribute when a shout from the line in front of them caught everyone's attention. The ogre that had just reached the line had activated some sort of magic, and his two-handed blade was glowing with black energy as he hacked at the soldiers. The blade was slicing through shields, pushing back the defenders, and about to cause a breach in the lines that dozens of goblins were waiting to exploit. Let's go. I will distract it with spells, but they won't do much to an ogre. Dominic volunteered as he pulled the empty cart to a stop and hopped to the ground. You're a scrappy sort, are you? All right, let's go. The sergeant laughed as he pulled an uncommon grade broadsword and shield from his inventory item. The oversized ogre seemed to notice their intentions and gestured in their direction. Two nearby ogres suddenly stopped fighting a defensive battle against the guards and shoved their opponents to the ground to charge at Dominic and the sergeant, while goblins behind them piled on the downed soldiers. We should have kept a couple of spears. Dominic joked as his next arcane blast dissipated harmlessly on an ogre's face. Just watch, I'll show you how the guard deals with ogres, he replied. The sergeant charged forward under the club of the incoming ogre and cut a shallow gash all the way across its stomach before sidestepping and stabbing into its ribs. Unfortunately, the blade didn't cut deep enough to hit organs, but it did put him on the far side of the ogre so that the monsters couldn't both attack him at the same time. The reserves from the back lines of the guard formation, soldiers who were catching their breath or recovering from injuries, ran over to join the battle and fill the gap that the ogres had left in their defenses, while Dominic momentarily blinded the other ogre with Arcane Blast and moved back out of its line of sight. He couldn't do much while it was facing him. He wasn't that good of a fighter. But once it turned to face the guards, he could try the cutting it down at the knees trick again. The guards had thought the same thing, and as the ogre turned toward the noise and blinked away the minimal damage to its eyes, a bola wrapped around its ankles and took the huge creature to the ground. The guards whooped in joy as the ogre got to its knees and swept them away with its club, but didn't do any significant damage. Dominic dug into his inventory and took out the rare blade he had created, then activated it with a surge of mana, extending the energy barrier to create a broadsword that was rather oversized for someone of Dominic's stature. His technique was crude, but the ogre wasn't paying any attention to Dominic as he charged, and the blade cut deep into the flesh of its back, then slid between the ribs and sunk deep into its chest. Thick black blood gushed from the wound, soaking Dominic, and the ogre let out a gurgling noise before toppling forward. He pulled the blade free and felt something enter his inventory cube as he touched the body to loot it. Then, a sense of dread overcame him, and a shadow fell over his vision as a massive club descended toward his head. He had forgotten that the other ogre was close enough to reach him, and now its club was too close to dodge. A thunk, much like the sound of an axe hitting a log, sounded right beside his head as Dominic rolled backward away from the strike. Then the broken half of a magical blade embedded itself in the ground next to him as the club swung just wide of his head. The sergeant had sacrificed his blade to knock the club away from its target. He threw the broken stub of a blade to the ground and pulled a hand axe from his belt with a grim look. "Here, use this," Dominic yelled, and tossed his blade to the sergeant hilt first. The sergeant nimbly caught it and danced under the ogre's next strike, while his team surrounded the beast with spears raised. The rare magical blade sliced smoothly through the leathery flesh of the ogre, and intestines spilled from the fresh cut as the sergeant went on the offensive. One massive hand moved to hold its innards inside the wound, while the sergeant hacked one of its legs off at the knee joint. The ogre began to spasm as it hit the ground, right before the sergeant took its head off with the blade and sighed in relief. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yeah, thanks for that. I thought I was about to get pounded into the ground like a 10-penny nail." Dominic sighed. The sergeant extended the blade back to him, but Dominic shook his head. "Give it back after. There's still that big thing to take care of, and you need it more than I do right now." One of the guards tapped the second ogre's body and smiled, then held out a small gem to the sergeant. "Here, put this in your shield. I know you've been looking for one," he insisted. It was an enhancement gem of minor repair, which would slowly mend tears and cracks in equipment, but wouldn't go as far as to repair a fully broken sword unless the pieces were held together tightly. "Perfect. Now I just need a new blade." The sergeant laughed. A full set of uncommon quality magical gear was the peak for enlisted guardsmen, unless they got very lucky, and a repair gem would keep it all in top condition, unless something outright shattered like his blade had done. Dominic climbed to his feet and sent a spell at the goblins in frustration. He had lost track of his surroundings and nearly lost his head. Literally. That just wasn't acceptable behavior. He was smarter than that. He kicked a corpse on the way by and felt something enter his storage cube again, so he took a second to look at what he had received. On top of the pile, the newest item was a spell gem, one of the magical crystals that would allow the use of a new spell once they were attuned. Dominic pulled it out to see what it could do and smiled softly to himself. Minor damage reduction gem reduces damage taken at the expense of magical energy. That was incredible. Any defensive spell gem was a huge bonus to someone like him, who could access enough mana to make the spell truly worthwhile. But there was something sparkly underneath it as well. The pile of cloth seemed to shimmer in the darkness of the cube's interior. Sorcerer Robe, rare quality clothing. Grants additional spell power. This item may only be removed by the wearer unless destroyed. Now that was a valuable item. It might not be a plate armor item, but it was still rare quality armor, and would take a lot to cut through. The only downfall was that it was cloth, so it would provide almost no protection from the actual physical impact of an attack. But then, as everyone was fond of pointing out, spellcasters weren't supposed to be standing in range of blades and clubs.